You're in line for coffee. You tap your card. Declined. Balance looks fine. You try again. Declined. You pull out cash. They wave it away. System says your account's flagged. No USD transactions until clearance. You haven't done anything wrong. You're not a criminal. But your money? Your money is no longer yours. Welcome to Nixon Shock 2.0, except this time, the shock doesn't come from the White House. It comes from outside the dollar system entirely. And it's already happening. Russia and China now settle 99% of their $245 billion in trade without touching a single dollar. Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar system for 50 years, just joined a blockchain payment network explicitly built to exclude Western currencies. India's buying Iranian oil in rupees. Brazil and China trade soybeans in yuan. The Bank for International Settlements, the central bank for central banks, just handed operational control of this parallel system to the very countries building it. If you think this sounds fringe, it's not. It's a $1 trillion geopolitical chess match, and the pieces are already moving. The question isn't if the dollar's dominance erodes, it's how fast. And what happens when $7.4 trillion in foreign-held dollars come flooding back to American shores? I'm going to walk you through the math, the mechanisms, and the nightmare scenarios. Let's dig in. The dollar's dominance was never about free markets. It was engineered in the wreckage of the 1973 oil embargo. Flashback, 1974. Nixon's just nuked the gold standard. Inflation's spiking. OPEC's got the West by the throat. Henry Kissinger flies to Riyadh with a deal. Saudi Arabia prices all its oil in dollars, and in return, America guarantees military protection and buys Saudi debt. By 1975, OPEC falls in line. Every barrel of oil sold globally now requires dollars. Here's why that mattered. If you're Japan and you need oil, you can't just print yen and buy it. You have to acquire dollars first. That means selling exports to America, buying treasuries, holding dollar reserves. Suddenly, the entire planet needs a constant supply of dollars just to keep the lights on. The US gets to print money, run deficits, and finance wars, because global demand for dollars is artificial and mandatory. Fast forward 50 years, that system is disintegrating. Russia-China trade, $245 billion annually, 99.1% settled in rubles and yuan, $0. India-UAE oil, first ever rupee-denominated crude purchase in 2023. Brazil-China soybeans, direct yuan-real settlement. China buys 70% of Brazil's soy, no dollars involved. Saudi Arabia's betrayal. In June 2024, the Saudis joined Project mBridge, a blockchain payment system designed by China, Thailand, Hong Kong, and the UAE to settle cross-border transactions in local currencies, bypassing dollars entirely. Let that sink in. Saudi Arabia, the literal foundation of the petrodollar, just signed up for the dollar's replacement. The petrodollar wasn't just about economics, it was a protection racket. America sells Saudi Arabia $2 billion in weapons, $1975, so like $12 billion today, and in return, the Saudis recycle their oil profits into US treasuries. That's how the US financed its deficit for 5 decades without consequence. But now, the Saudis are hedging. They're buying Chinese yuan. They're exploring oil futures denominated in non-dollar currencies. They're diversifying away from the very system they helped create. The nightmare scenario. If Saudi Arabia, and OPEC more broadly, stops requiring dollars for oil, global demand for the dollar collapses overnight. That's $7.4 trillion in foreign-held treasury reserves, suddenly optional. And if you're a central bank in Turkey or Indonesia, why hold a melting ice cube when you can hold gold or yuan? The petrodollar isn't dead yet, but it's on life support, and the DNR order's already signed. Let's talk about Project mBridge, the most consequential financial development of the decade that nobody's covering. In 2021, the Bank for International Settlements launches an experimental platform to test cross-border payments using central bank digital currencies. Participants include China, Thailand, Hong Kong, and the UAE. The goal? Instant settlement. No correspondent banks, no SWIFT, no dollars. By mid-2024, mBridge achieves minimum viable product status, real transactions, real value, real central banks. The platform can process instantaneous peer-to-peer settlements in local currencies using blockchain consensus. Then, in June 2024, Saudi Arabia joins. And in October 2024, the BIS does something shocking. It hands operational control to the participating central banks. Translation: this is no longer an experiment, it's infrastructure. Why this matters? Traditional cross-border payments work like this. You're a Russian oil exporter. You sell to China. Payment goes: rubles, Russian bank, correspondent bank in New York, SWIFT network, Chinese bank, yuan. That process takes days, involves multiple currency conversions, and gives the US government a choke point to monitor, freeze, or block the transaction. mBridge works like this: Russian central bank, Chinese central bank, instant, direct, no intermediaries, no dollars, no American surveillance. The geopolitical implications are staggering. Sanctions become toothless. If Russia and China can settle $245 billion in trade through mBridge, US sanctions on Russian banks are just annoying, not crippling. Dollar demand craters. Why hold dollars for trade settlement if you can use mBridge and settle in yuan or dirhams? The SWIFT nuclear option disappears. Kicking Russia out of SWIFT in 2022 was supposed to be a death sentence. But if alternatives exist, it's just free advertising for mBridge. You might think mBridge is just a pilot. It handles tiny volumes compared to SWIFT. True, for now. But network effects work both ways. SWIFT dominates because everyone uses it. The moment a critical mass of countries adopt mBridge, say OPEC members, BRICS economies, and China's Belt and Road partners, the cost of not using it exceeds the cost of adopting it. And that tipping point accelerates fast. China's already laying groundwork. Its cross-border interbank payment system processed $24.45 trillion in 2024, a 43% year-over-year increase. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, Iran, and Turkey have all signed yuan swap agreements or joined as participants. The infrastructure's already operational. Here's the kicker. The BIS, the institution that invented global financial plumbing, just endorsed this. They didn't shut mBridge down, they handed it over. That's not a research project, that's a Frankenstein walking out of the lab. Now let's talk about the asset that can't be frozen, can't be hacked, and can't be printed into oblivion: gold. On October 31, 2025, BRICS researchers conducted a pilot test of something wild. A gold-backed settlement unit designed for intra-BRICS trade. Not a unified currency, Trump's 100% tariff threats killed that idea, but a neutral settlement mechanism. Here's how it works. 40% physical gold, 40 grams in the test. 60% BRICS currencies, 12% each: Brazilian real, Chinese yuan, Indian rupee, Russian ruble, South African rand. The unit functions as an accounting mechanism. You're Brazil selling soybeans to India. Instead of converting reals, dollars, rupees, and eating exchange rate risk twice, you settle in units. Gold stabilizes the valuation. Blockchain ledgers track ownership. Daily pricing updates adjust for currency fluctuations. Why gold? 3 reasons. Universal store of value. No government controls it. No central bank can inflate it. It's been money for 5,000 years. BRICS dominance in supply. Russia produces 340 tons annually. China produces 380 tons. Combined, BRICS members control 50% of global gold production and hold over 6,000 tons in reserves. Sanctions immunity. You can freeze dollar reserves, ask Russia. You can't freeze gold bars in a Moscow vault. The accumulation patterns are wild. 1,000 tons of gold annually for 3 straight years, 2022 to 2024, compared to a historical average of 400 to 500 tons. BRICS members purchased more than 50% of that. Russia's gold reserves, 2,336 tons. China's gold reserves, 2,298 tons and climbing. India, 880 tons. Brazil just added 16 tons in September 2025. its first purchase since 2021. Gold's share of global foreign exchange reserves increased from 11% in 2010 to 18% in 2024. That's a structural reallocation away from dollar-denominated assets. The strategic logic. If you're a BRICS central banker, you've watched the US freeze $300 billion in Russian reserves, weaponize SWIFT, and threaten 100% tariffs on anyone building dollar alternatives. Gold is the only asset that's genuinely outside the American financial kill chain. Here's where it gets spicy. On January 30th, 2025, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, BRICS countries will face 100% tariffs if they attempt to create a new currency or back any alternative to the mighty US dollar. Translation: build a dollar alternative and we'll embargo you. The immediate political fallout. Brazil's President Lula, previously the loudest advocate for a BRICS currency, quietly removed it from Brazil's 2025 BRICS presidency agenda. Vladimir Putin, who literally displayed a prototype BRICS banknote at the October 2024 Kazan summit, publicly stated in November 2024, "We have not sought to abandon the dollar." This from a guy whose country has $300 billion in frozen reserves. The July 2025 BRICS summit in Rio. No mention of a unified currency in the final declaration. Trump's threats worked, in the short term. BRICS leaders retreated from bold currency unification plans because the economic cost of a 100% US tariff would be catastrophic. Brazil exports $40 billion to the US annually. China exports over $500 billion. A 100% tariff is functionally a trade embargo. But here's the problem. Coercion buys compliance, not loyalty. And it accelerates the exact dynamic it's trying to prevent. The Peterson Institute for International Economics modeled Trump's tariff threats. Result: US GDP falls by $432 billion by the end of his second term. Prices rise 1.6%. That's self-inflicted economic damage to enforce dollar hegemony. Meanwhile, BRICS didn't stop building alternatives. They just got quieter about it. Russia-China trade in local currencies? Still 99%. mBridge operational handoff? Still happened. CIPS transaction volume? Still up 43%. Gold accumulation? Accelerating. The paradox. Trump's tariff threats prove the dollar's vulnerability by demonstrating that its dominance now requires coercion rather than market preference. If the dollar were genuinely the best currency for trade, you wouldn't need 100% tariffs to prevent alternatives. The fact that you do tells every BRICS central banker, this system is fragile, diversify faster. The Brookings Institution's take: the US can impose secondary sanctions on third country participants in non-dollar systems, but doing so creates a sanctions paradox. Every use of financial coercion incentivizes the construction of sanction-proof alternatives. You're not preventing de-dollarization, you're just making it more urgent. Now let's talk about the repatriation nightmare. Foreign central banks currently hold $7.4 trillion in dollar reserves. Treasuries, agency debt, dollar-denominated assets. That number's been relatively stable in absolute terms, but the dollar's share of total reserves has cratered from 85% in the 1970s to 58.9% in Q3 2025, the lowest since 1994. Here's the doomsday scenario. If de-dollarization accelerates, if BRICS alternatives gain traction, if oil stops being priced in dollars, if mBridge handles meaningful transaction volume, then foreign central banks start selling treasuries. Not because they hate America, but because they don't need dollars anymore. You're Turkey. You used to hold $50 billion in treasuries because you needed dollars to buy oil. But now you're buying Russian gas in lira-ruble swaps and settling trade with China through CIPS. Why hold a depreciating asset yielding 4% when you could hold gold or diversify into yuan? If that happens en masse, $7.4 trillion in treasuries flood the market. Bond prices collapse, yields spike. US government borrowing costs explode. We're already running $2 trillion deficits. Imagine financing that at 7% instead of 4%. The Fed faces an impossible choice. Let yields spike and crash the economy, or print money to absorb the sell-off and trigger inflation. The US printed over $1 trillion during COVID to absorb treasury supply. If $7 trillion repatriates, you're looking at Weimar-level monetary expansion. But here's the counter-argument. De-dollarization doesn't trigger instant treasury dumping because dollar demand is sticky. Over $1 trillion in physical dollar bills are held outside the US, used for transactions in unstable economies, black markets, and store of value purposes. That demand persists even if trade settlement shifts. No alternative matches dollar liquidity. You can't dump $7 trillion into yuan. China's capital controls mean you can't freely move money in and out. Euro markets are fragmented. Gold's illiquid at scale. US capital markets remain unmatched. Deep, transparent, rule of law governed. American treasuries are still the safest large-scale asset on Earth. The IMF's take: the dollar will remain dominant for the medium term, 10 to 20 years, but gradual diversification will continue. No single alternative can replace it, but a basket of alternatives, euro, yuan, gold, can collectively erode it. The real risk isn't a collapse, it's a slow bleed. Every year, foreign central banks hold slightly less of their reserves in dollars. That reduces demand for treasuries. That forces the Fed to absorb more issuance. That limits the Fed's ability to fight inflation. That validates the decision to diversify away from dollars. Self-fulfilling prophecy. The Fed's balance sheet already shrank by $2.2 trillion since June 2022. It can absorb inflows, but only by tolerating inflation or choking economic growth. Neither's politically acceptable. Okay, reality check. De-dollarization has massive structural obstacles. Obstacle 1. Yuan convertibility. China's yuan accounts for just 3% of global SWIFT payments, down from 4% in late 2024. Why? Capital controls. You can't freely move money into or out of China. A former Bank of China VP admitted, as China's capital account is not fully liberalized, it would be very difficult to roll out a stablecoin domestically. If you're a Brazilian exporter, you'll accept yuan for trade with China, but you can't invest those yuan in global markets or convert them freely. That limits yuan adoption. Obstacle 2. BRICS internal dysfunction. BRICS isn't a coherent bloc. It's a collection of rivals pretending to cooperate. India versus China. India's terrified of replacing dollar hegemony with yuan hegemony. It's resisted yuan-denominated trade and refused to join China's Belt and Road Initiative. Brazil's pragmatism. Lula talks big about de-dollarization, then quietly keeps dollar reserves because he doesn't trust yuan liquidity. Russia's desperation. Moscow's the most motivated to escape the dollar, but it's also the most isolated. Its alternatives, rubles, yuan, don't work for non-China trade. Obstacle 3. Reserve currency prerequisites. The IMF lists what it takes to be a reserve currency. Deep, liquid capital markets. Only the US has this. Rule of law and contract enforcement. China's legal system is opaque. Russia's is Russian. Macroeconomic stability. Brazil and South Africa are volatile. India's capital flows swing wildly. Political trust. Would you trust Xi Jinping or Putin to hold your reserves? No BRICS country checks all boxes. The euro comes closest, but eurozone political fragmentation and sovereign debt heterogeneity limit its appeal. The paradox. De-dollarization proceeds at the margin, bilateral trade, specific corridors, but fails at the core. Reserve composition, global pricing, financial infrastructure. Because the dollar's advantages are genuine, not just coercive. Russia-China can trade in local currencies because they have to, sanctions, and can afford to, bilateral trust, limited alternatives. But a Kenyan importer, a Vietnamese exporter, a Turkish bank, they still prefer dollars because it's easier. Let's talk about what the suits aren't saying publicly. IMF's position decoded. Publicly, the dollar will remain dominant for the foreseeable future. De-dollarization is gradual and manageable. Privately, reading between the lines, we're terrified, but admitting it would accelerate the panic. The IMF's own data shows the dollar's reserve share at its lowest since 1994. They acknowledge gradual diversification while downplaying systemic risk. Translation: they see the erosion but can't stop it. European central banks play. The ECB issued $700 billion in joint European government debt during COVID, the first real step toward a unified Eurozone fiscal instrument. This creates euro-denominated alternatives to treasuries, potentially positioning the euro as a reserve alternative. But here's the catch. Eurozone politics are messy. Italy's debt is junk. Germany won't subsidize southern Europe forever. The euro can't replace the dollar if the Eurozone implodes. Bank for International Settlements mBridge handoff. The BIS doesn't make bold political statements, it just acts. And in October 2024, it handed mBridge to participating central banks. That's not an endorsement of de-dollarization, but its tolerance of it. The BIS could have killed mBridge, it didn't. Why? Because even the central bank recognizes that dollar weaponization creates demand for alternatives, and suppressing that demand would require more weaponization, creating more demand. Doom loop. Here's what's actually happening. De-dollarization is structurally real. Russia-China trade, 99% local currencies. CIPS transaction volume, up 43%. mBridge, operational and expanding. BRICS gold reserves, 6,000 plus tons and climbing. Dollar reserve share, lowest since 1994. But it's not a collapse, it's an erosion. Dollar still dominates 88% of FX transactions. US Treasuries remain the deepest, most liquid market on Earth. No alternative currency offers comparable convertibility, liquidity, and trust. BRICS internal divisions prevent unified action. The trajectory: gradual multipolar transition. Dollar remains dominant but shares influence with euro, yuan, and gold. Specific trade corridors: Russia-China, BRICS energy, go local currency. Central banks diversify reserves. Pace determined by US fiscal sustainability or lack thereof, Chinese economic growth and yuan internationalization, American use of financial sanctions as a weapon. The strategic mistake: Trump's tariff threats deter bold currency unification, but accelerate quiet infrastructure building. Every coercive threat validates the need for alternatives. You can't sustain hegemony through coercion, only through continued delivery of value, stability, liquidity, trust. The real question: does the US double down on institutional advantages, rule of law, transparent markets, fiscal discipline? Or does it burn credibility faster than BRICS builds alternatives? Because right now, it's a race. And the finish line's a lot closer than most people think. So here's your survival guide. Diversify. If central banks are buying gold and diversifying reserves, maybe you should too. Not financial advice, but gestures broadly at everything. Watch mBridge transaction volumes. If they spike past $1 trillion annually, that's the canary. Dead. Track yuan SWIFT share. If it breaks above 5% and holds, we're in acceleration phase. Monitor treasury yields. If 10-year yields spike past 5% without a recession, foreign demand's cracking. And most importantly, stop assuming the dollar's dominance is permanent. It's not physics, it's politics. And politics change. Let me know in the comments, how fast do you think this transition happens? 5 years? 20? Or is the dollar genuinely invincible? If this woke you up even a little, smash that like button so the algorithm knows people care about financial freedom and not just cat videos. Subscribe if you want more terrifying deep dives, and share this with someone who still thinks the dollar's backed by gold. Because it's not. It's backed by momentum, and momentum works great until it doesn't. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp.